Hey everybody, today I'm out in Tennessee taking a look at the all-new 2023 Toyota Crown. This is technically not the first time the Crown has been sold in the US, and this is the spiritual successor to the Toyota Avalon. Now, what is the Toyota Crown? There's been a lot of confusion about this. Some want to call it a crossover sedan or a sport utility sedan. Toyota is clarifying things by saying this Crown is definitely a sedan. We don't get the crossover and wagon models that you will find internationally in the Crown lineup. Now, in the US, the front end can be a little bit controversial if you choose this two-tone color scheme, which is not how I would buy my Crown. Let's just put it that way. I'm not the biggest fan of this huge stripe that runs all the way from the front all the way across the back. I think it looks pretty good in single colors, but the two-tone scheme is just a little over the top for me. Let me know what you think about that. We have full LED multi-module headlights with an aggressive light strip that runs right across the front that really gives it a distinctive look. And then not a lot of cooling is going on because every version of the Crown, including this top-end trim, is going to be a full hybrid. Now, full-size sedan doesn't mean quite what it used to, because at 72.4 inches wide, this is almost exactly the same width as a Camry. Moving around to the side, you can see why some people are confused about the sedan versus crossover thing, because we have some crossover-like styling cues like the black cladding around the wheel wells and around the bottom of the vehicle. Now, this is only 0.2 of an inch higher off the ground than a Toyota Camry, but the driver's seat is about 4 inches higher off the ground because they made the roofline about 4 inches higher than a Camry. So it has a bigger box on top, but that doesn't yield greater ground clearance. The style of this is also a bit different than the average sedan that Toyota has brought to the US before, especially back here in the rear, where it definitely has more of a liftback or hatchback look, but we have an actual trunk, not a liftback or a sportback, which would have been a little bit more practical. At 196.1 inches long, this is about 4 inches longer in overall length versus the Camry, although interior dimensions are pretty similar because, again, of the way that the structure has been rearranged and the form has been changed, especially right back here in this area. You can see that the greenhouse in the rear really pinches in, and then we have a styling cue that I think is actually a bit more Lexus than Toyota, with this rear window and then the black strip that runs right through there. If you don't get the two-tone paint scheme, this little strip that runs right there across the trunk lid remains black, tying it in with the rest of the glass of the vehicle. And then we have a pretty aggressive haunch back here, even though the tires are not as wide as you might think. Toyota says that the Crown now has the biggest wheels that they've ever offered on a sedan, up to 21-inch wheels depending on the trim, but the tires are a little on the narrow side, I think. 225 width tires are the widest tire you can get, and the top-end Hybrid Max is a bit more of a performance machine, and it weighs 4,300 pounds, so I'm surprised they didn't put maybe 245s, maybe 255s on it. Moving all the way around to the rear, the CLS-like profile is very obvious. This roofline just continues dropping and dropping and dropping, and then we get the barest hint of a little spoiler right there on top of the trunk lid. Now again, this is the two-tone model. I think it's a little unusual, let me just say that. Brian, however, thinks that this is fantastic looking. I think he might be blind. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. We have a really interesting LED light strip that runs all the way across the rear. This gives it kind of a Volkswagen look, but I really like it. I think it looks really premium from a distance if you get the monotone paint job. The big thing for me, I think, is not that the trunk lid is black, it's that this entire surround all the way around the side is also black. Now, this is the top-end platinum trim, of course. We have some additional details down here and parking sensors well integrated into the rear bumper. But again, just a trunk lid. If I can find that button, there's the tiny button there. And the trunk opening is certainly a lot more vertical than it is horizontal. So this is not the biggest trunk available. At the beginning, the Crown is going to be offered with 2 different hybrid systems, and then a little bit later, a plug-in hybrid should start appearing at some point. The base hybrid system is basically borrowed out of the Highlander. It's a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder hybrid producing 236 horsepower. All-wheel drive is standard on that model, and you'll get 41 miles per gallon combined. Then we have this hybrid system, the most interesting new hybrid from Toyota in quite some time, basically borrowed out of the Lexus RX. This is a 2.4-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, not the 2-motor planetary hybrid system that we find in the base version and most of Toyota's hybrids up till this point. The system is good for 340 horsepower total, 400 pound-feet of torque, and it's good enough to get this from 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds, while still giving you 30 miles per gallon combined. What's interesting about this hybrid system is that it uses the same battery pack as the regular hybrid model, so still a nickel metal hydride unit. They're doing that for cost, obviously, and some complexity reasons as well. And then we have a different electric motor in the back. It's liquid cooled, it gives you 80 horsepower, and the system is going to use that electric motor differently than the regular hybrid model. The regular hybrid model will turn into a front-wheel drive vehicle under a wide variety of different driving conditions, basically turning off the electric motor in the back. This hybrid system won't do that. It's always going to be sending power to the rear electric motor when your foot is on the gas pedal. Now, this system is never going to be able to send more than 80 horsepower to the rear, so it's never going to be tail-happy like a Mustang, but it is going to feel substantially like a Volvo plug-in hybrid, depending on the driving situation, thanks to that extra power in the rear. Now, the unfortunate side is that this hybrid system does bring curb weight up to about 4,300 pounds, so about the same kind of curb weight that we find in a V8 Dodge Charger. Standard on all versions of the Crown is Toyota's latest active safety package called TSS 3.0. That combines a lot of the features that we've seen before, like full speed range radar, adaptive cruise control, pedestrian and cyclist detection, autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, lane centering, and active high beams, with a new feature called Proactive Driver Assist. Proactive Driver Assist is sort of a combination technology. It works with the other systems in the vehicle to give you subtle steering and braking intervention to help keep you the right distance from traffic in front of you, whether that's another car or a cyclist or a pedestrian that's on the road. And then, of course, we have Toyota's driver monitoring system with the integrated cameras right there behind the steering wheel that's going to pay attention to you paying attention to the road, and it's going to let you know if it thinks you're being inattentive. Hopping into the driver's seat, you'll definitely notice that the seating position is different than the Avalon that this is theoretically replacing, and of course the Toyota Camry. The seating position is not quite crossover-like though, so this is not as upright as a Corolla Cross or a RAV4 or a Highlander. You can see that my legs are definitely sticking out there in front of me, but the seating position is quite comfortable. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion, multi-way power driver seat with two-way adjustable lumbar. I do wish four-way lumbar happened in the Crown, but we don't see that at this point in time. And then we have a two-position memory over there for the driver. The passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. It's missing the adjustable lumbar support that we find over here. And the driver's seat appears to be slightly higher off the ground, even in its lowest height position, than the passenger seat on the other side. So taller passengers might be okay, but taller drivers, you aren't going to find that much room in here. My hair is almost brushing the ceiling here, sitting in a position that's comfortable for me at 6 feet tall. The interesting thing about seating position in this vehicle is that the seat has been moved higher off the ground, but the roofline has not been changed as much as the seating position has. So depending on exactly your seating position, you might find a bit less room in here than you'll find in the Camry. Jumping into the back seat, you'll notice that full-size sedan doesn't mean quite what it used to. I have about 1.5 inches of legroom back here. We have approximately 82 inches of combined legroom, but headroom is actually about 1/2 inch below the Toyota Camry. So sitting in an upright position, putting my head back here to the headrest, my head is touching the ceiling in the back of the Crown, and you'll find a little bit more headroom in some of the competition. But this is simply a fact of life. Every sedan in America seems to be getting lower and lower in the back seat area, so the Crown is not unique in this. If I move over to the middle seat position, you'll really notice what's going on. There is just no way I could sit comfortably in this middle seat position unless I'm practically holding my legs right there. I absolutely cannot get my head back there to the headrest. But with this driver's seat in an appropriate position for me driving, you can see I have definitely a lot of legroom, and there's plenty of room back here for things like child seats, booster seats, etc. And the rear bench is nice and wide. The rear seats fold in a 60/40 fashion, and we have softly padded center armrest. Rear passengers get cup holders with that little flip out section, and then you'll notice that the trunk pass-through has kind of an odd shape to it, and the rear seat backs are definitely quite a bit higher off the ground than that trunk opening. Before we take a look at the trunk, this is the model obviously without the two-tone paint scheme, what Toyota's calling the bicolor paint scheme. You can see that not only is the trunk lid not black, but this entire surround is not black. I think that's the problem for me with that two-tone scheme. Now let's take a peek inside. We find just over 15 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which puts this oddly enough a little bit below the Camry in terms of its cargo capacity. There is still plenty of room for things like 24-inch roller bags, and the trunk is fairly tall, letting you put some of those larger items in, but it's not as practical as a lift back, which is kind of what I expected to see in the Crown. But one thing that we don't see in very many new vehicles is found under the floor, and that is an actual temporary spare tire. Now let's go for a quick spin around the interior. I think this interior looks the best in the lighter colored interior options, but unfortunately there weren't very many of those to film today, so I was only able to spend time in the darker interior colors. We have a dual pane moonroof, but this does not open. Both of these panels are fixed into place, although there is a shade that covers them up. This front panel is fairly small, as you can see. It's maybe only about 10 inches or so And then the one back here, maybe that's about 20 or 24 inches deep. Over here, we have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and height adjustable headrests. As you'd expect out of a vehicle that's designed to be a step above something like the Camry, there's a lot more attention to detail here. Nice touches like the piping on the seats. These seats are both heated and ventilated in this model, which is also a nice touch. Slightly more aggressive bolstering than we find in the Camry seats. Moving over to the door panels, we find lots of soft touch materials on the upper section, harder plastics down lower, and it's a little bit difficult to see on camera, but the accents for the most part around this interior are almost copper colored. There are some more silver tone accents like the door handle, but the dashboard accents, you can see those are all copper tone as well. You can really see the difference with those two right next to each other. The dashboard definitely is a high style dashboard. You can see that it wraps around the passenger in that area. We have a mixture of hard and soft plastics here, so soft touch in this middle section, hard plastics lower. We then find a somewhat small slot-style glove compartment. I was a bit surprised. This is on the small side, and I wasn't able to fit a large tablet computer inside. Lots of soft touch materials going on the dashboard, and you can see that the style is a little bit different on the driver and front passenger side, so they didn't decide to make this a mirror image of one another. Here in the middle of the dash, we have the latest infotainment software from Toyota. This is an approximately 12-inch LCD screen. You can see it supports Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, factory navigation, etc. The smartphone integration functions wirelessly as well, which is a nice touch. Below that, we find two large air vents, some physical controls for the climate control system there, lots of individual buttons for seat heating, seat ventilation, the climate control toggles right down there, the engine start-stop button. We then have a slot-style Qi wireless charging slot right there. Actually, there's enough room so you can actually put multiple phones in there, even if you wanted to, although obviously only one is going to charge at a time. USB-C charge ports right there in the dash. A joystick-style shifter. We put our foot on the brake and pull back for drive. Park is that button right there. Two really big cup holders. Drive mode toggle, brake hold, EV mode, parking brake button, stability and traction control button right there. And then you can open the center console from either side, which is also another nice touch. Pretty typical Toyota key. You can see silver accents there, no bronze accents. And then some reasonable amount of storage space right there under that little tray. Over on the driver's side, most models are going to have this large LCD instrument cluster. I am surprised that this is bigger than the one that we find in the new Lexus RX. So oddly enough, if you want a more premium technology experience, you might want to get this over that Lexus. Moving out from there, we have a 3-spoke steering wheel with kind of a split bottom spoke there. Controls for that multifunction display over here on this side. The adaptive cruise control over on the right side, and then we have volume and track forward backward toggles down there at the bottom. These little eyes looking at you are part of the driver attention monitoring system. That's kind of a cool touch, although we don't have the same sort of semi-autonomous systems that we find, for instance, in the new Nissan Ariya in this vehicle. I like the fact that Toyota's made so many active safety systems standard in this vehicle, but we don't have any sort of semi-autonomous hands-off-the-wheel steering system like we do find in the new Nissan Ariya, for instance. All right, it's time to get the Crown out on the road. Obviously, the first thing we should do is floor it. According to Toyota, 0 to 60 should happen in about 7.6 seconds, so not really too far off where we find the Toyota Camry Hybrid. But this has all-wheel drive standard, so it's not going to feel quite like the Camry Hybrid, because if you're in a corner and you floor it, you're not going to get as much torque steer as you find in the Camry, because some of the power is going to go to the rear axle. And that does make it feel more sorted in corners like that power on. Now, obviously, this is not going to be as swift 0 to 60 as some of the competition, because we find much less horsepower in this base trim than we find in a lot of the competition, like the Maxima. But the feel behind the steering wheel is not too far off that Nissan, because it has a real CVT. This has a transmission that feels a lot like a CVT, even though it isn't actually a CVT. The best way to describe this hybrid system is that it feels kind of like a blend between a CVT and an electric vehicle, because it kind of is both of those things, I guess you could say. 60 to 0 stopping distances are likely going to be a bit long for this segment. This model with the standard hybrid system weighs just under 4,300 pounds. The model with the Hybrid Max system, that weighs just over 4,300 pounds. And all models are going to have 225 with tires. So I wouldn't be surprised if the stopping distance on this model was upwards of 125, perhaps even 130 feet, where we find some hybrid crossovers. That's logical just due to the curb weight of the vehicle. Now, on the other hand, the curb weight helps this feel like a more traditional American sedan in a way. If you're looking for something that's more comfortable riding, that's certainly going to be the Crown. This suspension combined with the higher curb weight helps soak up the bumps. It feels very smooth out on rougher road surfaces or open highway like the one that we're on right here. Now you will notice that this hybrid system does have a bit more noise in the cabin than I had expected. If you want something a bit quieter, you're going to want to take a look at a Lexus ES hybrid. There's certainly more sound deadening going on in the Lexus ES between the engine bay and the passenger compartment than we find here. So under full throttle acceleration, you're definitely going to hear the engine revving up. As far as handling dynamics go, it's a little bit difficult to talk about this because I haven't been driving this on my usual road courses, but it does feel pretty well sorted, just like we find in other Toyota front-wheel drive platforms. But keep in mind, again, the curb weight of the vehicle. So this is going to put it a little bit behind other entries in the segment that are lighter than this. And it's not going to ever have the kind of rear-wheel drive feel that you'd find in the Dodge or the Chrysler, but as I said before, this is probably going to be significantly more reliable. Now let's talk about the new hybrid system, the Hybrid Max. This is significantly faster, and you will certainly notice it even when the engine is off. 0 to 60 supposedly in 5.7 seconds, but this feels a little bit swifter than that, and it certainly has a very different feel than the base hybrid system. There are a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, way more power out of this system, over 300 horsepower, about 400 pound-feet of torque. About 300 pound-feet of that torque happens on the front axle, so there is definitely torque steer. You will notice that even in gentle corners like this, that there is a lot of power in the rear. But if you were to make a sharp right turn and floor it, you would notice that the rear end is going to swing out a little bit, just as you'd find in, say, a Volvo plug-in hybrid. And really, the best way to describe this, if you're familiar with some of the luxury options available in the US right now, is that it does feel more like a Volvo plug-in hybrid than a traditional Toyota or Lexus hybrid, because those also have a reasonable amount of power on the rear axle. They can really get that rear end to swing out a little bit. It's not going to turn this into a Ford Mustang or anything like that, but it is going to have a really solid feel to it. And it's also going to have a more traditional feel because, of course, it has that 6-speed automatic transmission under the hood, and you can use the paddle shifters to shift the engine just like you might want. When shifting as a regular automatic transmission, it feels a little bit like a dual clutch transmission now and then because it doesn't have a torque converter. Instead, it has a wet clutch separating the transmission from the engine. So shifts are pretty smooth and they're pretty quick as well. Both hybrid systems have pretty comparable cabin isolation. Road noise is well controlled, wind noise is well controlled, but you definitely get more engine noise in the cabin than I had expected. A key difference between this hybrid system and the base hybrid system is the regen brake feel. This regen doesn't seem to be quite as aggressive, likely due to the design of this hybrid system, but it is still pretty smooth, and that is surprising given the fact that the regenerative braking is going basically through that 6-speed automatic transmission. As I'm slowing down to a stop here, the transmission is downshifting from 6th gear, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, etc. until you come to a complete stop. So in that respect, it is very similar to, say, a Hyundai or a Kia hybrid system, with one important difference, the rear electric motor, which is also doing some of the regen braking. And it seems that Toyota is using that rear electric motor to help make those shifts a little bit less noticeable than we find in the Hyundai and Kia hybrids. But the actual design of this hybrid system is somewhat closer to those Korean hybrids with the 6-speed automatic transmission under the hood. If you're interested in the Toyota Crown, you have a pretty tough decision ahead of you. Do you get the base hybrid system that's really focused on efficiency, or do you get this more performance-oriented hybrid system with the Hybrid Max in the top-end Platinum trim? It's an interesting twist that you don't get to choose which system you want in the Platinum. If you get the Platinum, you get this system. If you get the other trims, you get the other system. And they're very different in personality. This one has a lot more power. It is definitely a lot more engaging to drive, and the fuel economy, it's a lot lower as well. This one theoretically is EP rated for about 30 miles per gallon. Over a day of mixed driving, it's actually been down around 27 miles per gallon. That's really not that much more efficient than the same turbocharged engine under the hood of a Lexus NX without the hybrid system. But if you're doing a lot of slow and go or stop and go or city driving, this is probably going to be more efficient than that. Out on the open highway is where fuel economy seems to really drop with this system, especially if you live in an area with 70, 75, or even 80-mile-an-hour speed limits. You're going to notice a pretty big difference in fuel economy between this and the regular hybrid model. Of course, on the other hand, you get a Crown with significantly faster acceleration and I think a slightly better exhaust note as well. This 2.4-liter turbo definitely sounds a little bit more refined and certainly a little sportier than the 2.5-liter hybrid, and we get the advantage of things like the adaptive suspension system that's only available in this Platinum trim. Be sure and sound off in the comments section below and let me know what you think about this new Toyota hybrid system. It really is a big change for Toyota, because up until this point, Toyota hybrids have been incredibly reliable because they're incredibly simple. Naturally aspirated engine, a single planetary power split system, 2 electric motors. And this system is a lot more complicated. It's got 2 clutches, it's got a 6-speed automatic transmission jammed in there, it's got a turbocharged engine, a liquid-cooled electric motor in the back, etc. This is a lot more complicated than the hybrid system that we find in the base model, but of course it's a lot more fun as well. And this is the first time that Toyota has really given us this ability to choose, do you want fun or do you want that traditional Toyota hybrid system? If you want to get your hands on the new Toyota Crown, these are going to be on dealer lots the first part of calendar year 2023. So you should head down to your dealer right now and let them know you want to be one of the first in line to get Toyota's new full-size sedan. Now, full-size is of course a little bit tricky because this is not substantially larger than a Camry in any real dimensions. On the outside, it's a little bit bigger. On the inside, it's almost exactly the same size. But that's true of most full-size sedans in the moment, at least in this mainstream segment. The Nissan Maxima is actually smaller than this, and it's smaller in many dimensions on the inside than a Nissan Altima. We of course have the Chrysler 300 and the Dodge Charger. Those are going to be continuing on for a little bit longer, and those have optional V8 engines. So if you want that kind of power, you're going to get similar curb weight and better performance. But obviously the experience is going to be quite different and the fuel economy is going to be way lower in those options. Also available in this segment is something like the Kia Stinger. On the outside, it's similarly sized to this, but it does have a real liftback, so it's a little bit more cargo practical. It of course has a twin-turbo V6 engine, making it an awful lot of fun, but the rumor mill says that production is going to stop very soon if it hasn't stopped already, and it's probably not coming back for next model year. If you want the limited trim of Crown, that's going to step up to $45,500. It will still have the same 236 horsepower hybrid system. Base horsepower in the Crown is lower than most of the competition, and as a result, performance in the base model is lower as well. But if you want higher performance than most of the competition, except of course for those V8 options, then you're going to want the Platinum trim. That's what we've been taking a look at for most of today. This starts at $52,350. And if you really want the two-tone color scheme, then this is the only model you'll be able to get that on. Of course, that is an option. How does that compare against the biggest competitors in this segment, which have to be the Chrysler and Dodge twinsies? Well, this is going to be more expensive. For instance, you can get a 5.7-liter V8 engine in your Chrysler or your Dodge for just over about $45,000 or so, depending on the trim. The V6 engines, they're going to start around $33,000 to $34,000, but they're not going to be anywhere near as modern as the Crown. And obviously, the Crown is going to be way more fuel efficient. This has all-wheel drive standard. It's available only in the V6 with the Chrysler and the Dodge twinsies. And any way you slice it, this will be getting at least 10 miles per gallon better fuel economy. Even if you're taking a look at the heaviest and most powerful version of this, it's still going to be more efficient than the Chrysler or the Dodge. Which is right for you will really depend on your priorities. Are you looking for a more modern interior, higher reliability, etc.? Obviously, you will find all of that in here. If you're looking for V8 power and more of a traditional sedan format, you're going to find it in those other alternatives. Toyota's new Hybrid Max drivetrain is really an interesting twist for the Crown. It definitely has a different feel than we find in every other Toyota hybrid system that has come before it. It feels more engaging, more direct, and that's exactly what Toyota was after with this system. Up till now, the systems that we've found in the Camry, the Corolla, etc., they all have a pretty similar feel, and that is the feel that you're going to get in the XLE and Limited versions. But if you want something a bit more interesting, you can get the Platinum trim. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And again, I really want to know what you think about the styling and this two-tone paint option. It is not exactly my cup of tea, but I have warmed up to it a little bit versus the first time I saw it in the studio. Let me know down there in the comment section. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Find me over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those social places, and we'll see all of you next week.